B P Sweany, thank you so much for being here today. We're so grateful that we get to interview you. I would love if you could introduce yourself.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me. First off, my name's B P Sweany. I am a novelist and by night, an audiobook publisher by day. My debut YA novel, The Sword and the Sophomore, comes out in July from Third World Studios. And it's something that I've been working on for a little while. It evolved from, believe it or not, an adult novel that came out in 2016 that I had published, and it's been an interesting journey. And I guess I'm here to talk a little bit about that journey.
Yes, I would love if you could tell us what your books are about.
Okay. Well, we'll go back in reverse. My first novel that was published in 2016 was Buy the Ticket, Take the Ride. That book I refer to it as sort of therapy on a page. It was a semi-autobiographical novel set in southern Indiana about a boy from roughly the age of 15 to 30, and how he learned to become a husband, a father, and a man while those examples in his life were taken away from him. I had said therapy on a page, and it definitely was. I lost my dad in a freak car accident when I was 21 years old, and I had a godfather who had no business being around young boys. And to this day, I bear the scars of both those uh, tragedies. But my first book really helped me get through that. And on one of my last stops on my book tour for that book, I was at Tattered Cover in Denver. And I can't remember if it was the store manager or somebody that was in the audience. But after the signing, they came up to me and said, "Brian, I love your book, but I really loved the first part of it. When you were writing in that 15 to 21-year-old voice, you had just this uninhibited voice, this fearlessness. Part of it was me just wanting to see what stupid thing you would do next, but it felt like you really liked being in that voice of a teenager that had so very little context about life that that everything was the biggest deal, and everything that was sad was the saddest moment possible, or everything that was funny was the funniest thing ever, and you just seemed to revel in that chaos and in that unreliable narrator. Maybe you should try YA. And I'm like, okay, maybe. And so I literally I went back to my hotel, and I had this idea that was just immediately in my brain. And I pinned some stuff down on paper. And I came home and I rewatched all of Buffy the Vampire Slayer from beginning to end for about the fifth time. And then I'm like, I think I have what's going to be this YA novel. I think I have it. And it's going to be a transsexual teenage boy who's the son of a human father and a Valkyrie mother. And started writing it, and then I went to a book conference in my day job as an audiobook publisher, and I saw a big advertisement saying that Rick Riordan was pivoting from Greco-Roman gods to Norse gods. And I'm like, well, he stole my idea. And so I leaned back kind of on the fantasy and lore of my childhood, which is Arthurian. And so I redid the whole story, and it helped because I was struggling with that voice in the original iteration of my YA fantasy novel. And Arthurian, just because I had seen so much Arthurian, I had read so much Arthurian as a kid, it was just the voice came a little bit more naturally. And I also happened to have a teenage daughter at the time who's she's just a voracious reader, and she was kind of talking into my ear and being a beta reader, and her friends were being my beta readers. And then I came upon this idea of a teenage girl heroine who discovers, very Buffy like, she's the chosen one, kind of archetype, that has these special powers, but her powers are derived from the fact she's the latest in this prophecy called the lust-born tide, which says that a child born of conceived of lust will be imbued with certain special powers. And it turns out that she is the teenage daughter of Lancelot and Guinevere, who've been banished to a 21st century American suburb. And in my story, there's a lot of, again, well, much like Buffy, self-deprecation, self-awareness. It makes fun of the genre. It makes fun of itself. And so that this tongue-in-cheek aspect manifests itself in this idea that when Guinevere and Lancelot were caught, banishment to a 21st century American suburb was seen as a punishment worse than death. And so that's kind of the basic construct of the novel. And so we have this heroine and Mary Banson in The Sword and the Sophomore, book one, who's at this prep school in Maryland, American Martyr, and she has her best friend. She has the boyfriend that she's pining over. They've just broken up as we're introduced to them, and the story kind of the story is yes, it's a fantasy, but it's mostly a contemporary YA novel that just uses Arthurian fantasy as metaphors for everyday teen problems. So you have you have tragedy, you have sexual agency, you have social cliques. All those things are packed in there, and the story is her kind of navigating this lust-born prophecy, navigating her friendships, not only her best friend, but her new platonic friend, who's this Welsh foreign exchange student who is, spoiler alert, Merlin, who's aged back to the age of 16. And then, of course, her trying to find her way back to the love of her life, her boyfriend, Ben's. And ultimately, that's the story I really felt comfortable writing. And I think it works. My editor thinks it works. My agent does, and I hope readers do.
Love that. What inspired you to write your books?
Well, the first book, as I said earlier, was Therapy on a Page. It was inspired. It was inspired by my life. I almost had, if I hadn't have written that book, I'd have gone insane. I'm like, how does a boy find his way to manhood when he loses his father, when he is sexually abused for the first 10 years of his life by his godfather, and his worldview or his view of love is and connection is shaped by that. And so that first book, it almost wrote itself. The fantasy was an entirely different animal. I did not think I would write at first I didn't think I would write YA fantasy, and then it was the original incarnation of it was this Norse mythology, and then it pivoted to Arthurian, but ultimately that was driven by what I read as a child. I was a speed reader from a very early age, and so I was reading Frank Herbert and Tolkien and Isaac Asimov when I was 11, 12 years old. And so that came to me easily because write what you know. And the adult book, I knew pain, I knew suffering, and with the YA book, I knew fantasy. And then later on in my 20s and 30s, I started kind of going outside the teen fantasy that I was raised on, and started reading Ursula Le Guin. Marion Zimmer Bradley is probably the big influence on me in terms of somebody who took Arthurian mythology and turned it on its ear. That when I first read Mists of Avalon, that I'm like, that's kind of what I want to do with Arthurian. And then and then also a shout out to to Monty Python's Holy Grail, Monty Python's Spamalot. You know, both of those were Arthurian, but in a farcical way. So I saw both of those kind of visions of Arthurian fantasy, the overtly proudly feminist Arthurian and Marion Zimmer Bradley, and then the uninhibited, uproarious version of Arthurian with Monty Python. And I'm like, can I find a way to get somewhere in the middle between those two? And that's what inspired the YA book.
Love that so much. When you were writing your books, who were you thinking of when it comes to who your books are for?
Ooh, that's a tough one. I mean, the obvious answer would be teen girls, because it features a teen girl heroine. But really, for me, it's there is no specific gender for my book. You know, much again, don't want to harp on it too much, but like a Buffy, or maybe more recently something like Riverdale, or Sabrina, or the Diaries. That there's a generally asexual audience for this group. They love, I don't know if detachment's the right word, but they love being able to kind of see their lives framed in a fantastical way that maybe allows them to deal with it easier. But for me, that's I think that I don't have one audience in mind. I have the person that suffers through, social stratification in high school. That's definitely somebody I want to read this. The person that gets picked on, but I don't mind if the popular people read it too, because I make fun of them and I want them to kind of take a hard look at themselves and how they treat people. And I want this book to impart lessons of agency, of empathy, and important things, and then adults too. Look no further than the romantasy craze that is sweeping publishing. The Rebecca Yarros, the Sarah Moss. There is. I like to call this book sort of romantasy adjacent. and that it's YA fantasy. It has a romance, but it's not overtly sensual, I guess is the word I'm looking for when you read a Moss or a Yarros. But I love there was this. My company publishes The Fourth Wing in audio, so I'm intimately familiar with Rebecca Yarros, and I love that. Her heroine, Violet, by the end of the book, she reaches mythic proportions in her heroism. And yet, the very first descriptor of her at the beginning of the book is embarrassingly vulnerable. And I love that. That's what I want. I want my book to have cool sword fights, but I want their vulnerability and an aspirational quality to my hero that anybody could relate to.
Love that. How long have you been writing and what made you really sit down and start writing?
Ooh. Well, the short answer is that I've been writing since I was since that's the short answer. I found early on that I was a speed reader, and then I found also that my speed reading kind of translated to a certain comfort level with the act of writing. Sentences came easy to me, English grammar came easy to me, and then it's embarrassing to admit, but I figured out I could write love poems when I was 13 or 14. And at that time I was awkward. I had braces. I was, I didn't quite fit in with any definitely wasn't part of the cool kids. And writing was kind of my way into the cool sect of sort of pretty pseudo intellectual, as intellectual as seventh and eighth grade people can be. But I was like, the intelligent, cool girls are kind of noticing me because I can string a few, pretty words together. And so that's literally how I started writing. But on a more serious note, in college, my dad owned a car dealership, and I kind of, just was coasting through college, figuring, oh, I'll get my business degree. Uh, I'll be a general manager at my dad's car dealership, and that's how my life will be. And there's worse lives to live. And then October 1st, 1992, my dad gets killed in a car accident. And after I, spent a long time mourning his passing, I went into my guidance counselor's office at college and said, I literally know life could end tomorrow. I don't want to take any class I don't enjoy. Dropped all my business classes, dropped all my legal classes. And I said, I love to read, I love to write, and I became an English major. And that's kind of when I really said, well, maybe if I could start writing, things down, maybe a story could come out of this, something beyond a love poem to a 13-year-old girl. I think I have something more substantial inside me. And at the time, I was attending a Catholic school, and I wrote a novel called The Messiah Project, which was a novel set in the near future where this group of rebellious scientists called the faith doctors decided that the way to save the world was to force the second coming on the planet by cloning Jesus. And very funny that I wrote that while attending a Catholic school. And that book, I still have a copy of the manuscript. It's still sitting over in my desk drawer, but it was bad, like really amateurish and silly and cliche, but it taught me how to write mechanically. In terms of, it taught me how to set aside time every day, how to write. And I always tell people this: the hardest thing to do as a writer is write when you have nothing to say. And it taught me how to do that. It taught me how to, even if you sit down for 3 hours and write total crap, you're writing, you're getting the synapses to engage. Eventually your brain is gonna stumble upon the really good idea. And maybe you have to write a whole bunch of terrible ideas to get to that one good idea. But writing this bad book gave me the tools to do that. And so, after that was rejected, and then I met my future wife and went through some certain things in terms. In some ways, my dad's passing, and not that I wouldn't give everything in me for him to be here right now, but in some ways, his passing gave me license to really grow as a person. In my writing, he was an only child, and my godfather was his brother, his best friend, and I would have taken that terrible secret about my godfather to the grave because I didn't want to break my dad's heart. When my dad passed, that gave me license to feel things, to hold people accountable, to recognize my truths and my pain, and all of that kind of just coalesced into me writing the first book, my first novel, Buy the Ticket, Take the Ride, which really was it, like, kind of, I thought it was the crowning achievement of my writing. I thought it was going to end there. I'm like, that's the story I wanted to tell. I had a 74-year-old man come up to me who had read my novel and said, Mr. Sweany, I was sexually abused for most of my teenage years by a family friend, and I have never told anybody. You're the first person in this Barnes and Noble right now that I'm telling. And I'm like, if nothing else happens to me as a writer, that's it. I can retire. And plus I have a day job that, that pays the bills. So I have that luxury. I don't have that kind of, sometimes I wish I had that sort of literary desperation that makes me want to write more and want people to hear my story. I want people to hear my stories, but I kind of that was the end. And yes, The Sword and the Sophomore came along and was a story that wanted me to tell it, and so I told it too.
Love that. What is your schedule like when you are writing a book?
Uh, it Well, there's a phrase or a question when it comes to writing, are you a gardener or an architect? And I am not an architect. I do not outline. I'm told by people, well, I think she said this in an interview, in fact, but I'm told that by people who know her that this is likely true that and this is a spoiler alert for people who haven't read Harry Potter or watched any of the movies, but before she even began the book, before she began Sorcerer and the Stone, that J.K. Rowling knew Snape was the good guy. And I'm like, I can't even wrap my brain around that. It's like I am what I call a binge creative. And what that is, when the muse is upon me, when the inspiration, I just kind of let it flow out. And I could write, I've sat down and written like 40 pages, no lie, in the span of about 16 hours. And then I got snap out of it. It's almost like a fever dream. And and but then there are times that I can't I can't think of an idea at all. Like I cannot get from this chapter to the next. I cannot bridge this situation with this one. And it's frustrating, but I've come to realize that that's just what my process is. And I know some people who write like that, but I also know some people who are very meticulous in their process. And toward the end, as I get near the end of a book, I actually become a little more analytical. When I can see the finish line, that's when I'm like, okay, I'm going to outline, every step to that finish line because I can see it. But if I can't see the finish line, I could be running through the trees. I could be in a ditch, not knowing where the hell I am. And so, yeah, I get both approaches, but I'm definitely much more the organic gardener that's just letting flowers grow wherever they want to grow and not the architect.
Love that. What do you need in your writing space to help you stay focused?
Oh, I need my phone to not be within a mile of me. Uh, I mean, social media is just poison to my creative process. That isn't a. I'm definitely not a purist in that. Uh, I'm somebody that will sit down with his word processor or typewriter, and I know authors who still use typewriters. Yeah, I still need the Google machine. I need to like if I'm like, is that how they would say that, or is this the right food? Is that they would be eating in Baltimore? And, I need the Google machine for that. But otherwise, for me, a little bit of classic music. The lights are not too bright, not too dim, and just me in front of my computer, but in my office. I'm not one. I have this. I kind of have my uh, home away from home near my house. It's called Books and Brews, and it's a microbrewery slash bookstore. And they have a screaming Wi-Fi, and you go in there, and there's people playing D&D, drinking a pint, and on their laptops. And I'm like, I cannot do that. I will go in there with my laptop, and I will come out 8 pints later having written nothing. And so for me, it writing I do need my solitude. I do need my space. I do need uh it's especially when I'm really feeling it. There's a I want to say near spiritual quality to it, but also it has kind of an underlying feeling of uh when you're exhausted the night before a final and you're just and you're just grinding. and it kind of all that just sort of works together uh, to make my writing space what works for me.
Love that. What is your favorite writing snack and drink?
Oh boy. Oh man. Probably, well, definitely coffee. I would say coffee is by far my favorite writing snack, but not too much, because if I get too wired on caffeine, then around midday in the afternoon, I want to take a nap and not write at all. Uh, but snack, that would be a hard one. I don't like eating around to my keyboard because that's gross. But but if I had to pick a snack or brain food, for lack of a better term, it would probably be something like, oh, I'm a huge fan of, especially when I'm writing in the middle of the night and I'm hunger pang, of egg and cheese on rye. I don't know why. I just like a nice rye bread with an egg and a slice of cheese, and that kind of fills me up without muddling my brain or making me want to, you know, take a food nap. And yeah, an egg and cheese on rye is probably it. Definitely not. I'm not a pastry guy. You get that sugar in me, and I just feel lousy. Like my brain stops thinking. I stop wanting to be constructive.
Love that. What type of books do you personally enjoy reading?
I kind of go back and forth. My day job, I am director of acquisitions for an audiobook publisher. So in any given week, I'm reviewing literally dozens of manuscripts. So the unfortunate circumstance of having that uh, job is that whenever you read uh, for pleasure, you feel guilty. You're like, oh, I need to be reading for my job. But when I do have the occasion to read for pleasure, um, like right now, I am reading Romantasy. I'm reading Sarah Moss and Rebecca Yarros, and enjoying it. But I've been like, probably the genre that I've read the most or uh, have been a fan of the longest is literary fiction. So more of the, Hilary Mantel, Ian McEwan, Colson Whitehead, Abraham Verghese. He wrote The Covenant of Water last year. That was a really, really big book. Oprah picked it, and I love. Sometimes I just love getting lost in a really kind of dense generational literary novel. My first novel, Buy the Ticket, Take the Ride, was inspired largely by The World According to Garp, and that's Irving's just old, classic book, and really the genre that I've read the most in. But I love fantasy. I fantasy was what I was raised on as a kid, and I come back to that often. Pierce Brown's Red Rising series is one of my favorite series. Science fiction along the lines, same thing. James S. A. Corey's The Expanse books. Just and I've started rereading Frank Herbert. With the Dune movie kind of bringing his name back into the cultural zeitgeist. I've read a lot of him. So yeah, and historical fiction, mysteries. There's not a whole lot of genres I don't touch. Not the biggest erotica fan, but but I know it has its place. And I would be remiss not to mention the Outlander series by Diana Gabaldon. I am what's referred to in Gabaldon circles as an outmander. And so I cannot wait for the next book. I cannot wait for the next season of Outlander. And for me, uh, I've adored the author and I've adored the series from day one. And I think they said they're just about start. They're going to start filming a prequel, and I think that's one of those books and one of those television series that both men and women can enjoy. It has the the Highlander, the Scottish element with the clansmen and the fighting and the war with the crown, but then it's very juicy, very romantic, very sexy, and it's one of the few shows that both my wife and I always look forward to. So I've got to mention Outlander.
Love that so much. Are there any books or authors that inspired you to become a writer?
Yes. Well, there's the easy answers. S.E. Hinton's The Outsiders. I mean, I can't say enough of that about that book. That's why I am trying to be a YA writer, because of S.E. Hinton. No, I mean, no doubt in my mind. Without The Outsiders, there would be no Sword in the Sophomore. Uh, to Kill a Mockingbird. Probably if there was one book that in any given year I would say was my favorite book I had ever read, To Kill a Mockingbird probably occupied the most years in that slot. Uh, a postmodern historical fiction novel that I love, but tends to, people look at it and try to comprehend it, and they're like, "Well, that seems out there," because it is. It's John Barth's The Sotweed Factor. It's a book about this 17th century uh, colonial Maryland tobacco farmer who gets chased by prostitutes because he's a virgin and he's trying to hold on to his virginity. And it's a satire of historical fiction. Like I said, it's kind of out there, but I love that book. It's just very rich, very ambitious. But I mean, the book, like the one book that Call of the Wild, that was the first novel I ever read. Like I remember reading it when I was like 7. It was the very first novel I read, and I love Jack London. But the book that I always try to mention in any interview or any discussion with writers or any discussion with aspiring writers or anybody of that ilk is Tim O'Brien's The Things They Carried. Like that is, I think that is the ultimate expression of American prose. It is just, it's on the surface, it's a book about war, but really it's one of the most uncategorical books you'll ever read. It's a collection of short stories. It's a novel. It's kind of a memoir. It's all these things, and it's just has such a great. If you've ever heard the phrase "economy of language," and which means there's no wasted word. Every word is meant to be where it is, and it's just so sparse and yet dense, and it's just a beautiful book that I reread probably once every other year just to be reminded about, well, to humble me a little bit, but to remind me that I will never be that good, but also to kind of give me something to aspire to as a writer. I might never reach the things they carried, but as long as I'm trying to reach the things they carried, then it's worthwhile.
Love that so much. You've touched on this next one, but what books did you grow up reading? Did you have an all-time favorite?
Mm. It's probably Tim O'Brien's The Things They Carried. I just think that is the ultimate expression of American letters. I mean, there's just so many along the way. Ellison's Invisible Man, Alice Walker's Color Purple. I actually had an occasion to spend a day with Alice Walker at one point, right before she made an appearance at a library conference. Uh, Isaac Asimov's Foundation, the first book in the Foundation series. That's the book that really taught me to love science fiction and fantasy and appreciate an author uh, for their world building and appreciate just what it takes to build a world. Irving's World According to Garp, is another one. So many to choose from, And I can and again, S.C. Hinton's The Outsiders. I can remember uh where I was when I read that novel for the first time. Seventh grade, Our Lady of the Greenwood in Greenwood, Indiana. And that was the first book where I read in which I saw me in the book. I had never had any book where I saw me in it. I was always like, oh, that's good. I can remember crying my face off when I read Old Yeller and he shot the dog, and that was kind of like a rite of passage for every boy to read that book and to experience that, and that was a powerful moment. But for me, The Outsiders, when you could put yourself in that book, I think that's as magical as reading can be.
Love that. On the other side of that, now as an adult, what are your favorite series or authors that if they come out with something, you automatically grab it?
Well, I mentioned earlier Pierce Brown's Red Rising. That's it's for la- pe- for lack of a better term, it's Game of Thrones in space, and I'm looking forward to whatever streaming service snaps up the television rights, because I will be a loyal watcher. Um, but he's a sci-fi writer, and as sci-fi writers do, they keep you waiting. But probably I would have to pivot back, and we really haven't talked about this, but the mystery field. Craig Johnson's Longmire novels were great mysteries. Ace Atkins, Quinn Coulson novels, revolving around a former Army Ranger in the Mississippi Delta. I love those books. Back in the day, I was, before he passed, and left behind a huge hole in our literary community. Elmore Leonard, he's kind of the guy that I point to when people come to me for writing tips. I'm like, just go to Elmore Leonard for the tips, because he always had just some great basic rules for writing that are like the great kind of endpoint for any aspiring writer. And that, I mean, I think that's about it. I'm trying to think of other series that I've tried to get into, or maybe I was into at one point, and then I just kind of went away from them. There's you think about your childhood reads, and I was the one boy in class who was a cute, huge Judy Blume fan, and Tales of a Fourth Grade Nothing and Super Fudge. I loved those books, and but yeah, there's a lot, but I mean, Lori King, that's a good one. Lori R. King writes this series revolving around the wife of Sherlock Holmes, and it's Sherlock Holmes and Mary Russell series. And so, and it's a book that, we meet a young Mary Russell in book one, and then over the course of a few novels, as they solve crimes, Sherlock and Mary fall in love, and that's kind of my that's my only. I was never a big Sherlock Holmes fan, so this is the closest I've become to being a Sherlockian, as they call it, is reading Lori King's books. So I thank her for that.
Love that. What would you tell someone just starting out with reading again?
I would tell them to not get tripped up by the details. I think I think when people read, and they miss things, like when they miss something in a movie, they feel like they need to press pause and rewind well, what did I miss? And I need to go back. And I always tell, especially if you're getting into reading, just it's the early stages. Just read. Let your brain will figure it out. Uh, the detail Your brain hears these details. You may not think that your brain hears the details, but it does. And eventually it'll piece the story together. And it can be frustrating at first, because you'll be like, oh, who's that character? Well, I didn't see that coming. Why didn't I see that coming? Oh, because something happened a couple chapters earlier. But really, don't get tripped up by the minutia of the story. Just read it. And if at the end of the book you're like, well, something went over my head, then maybe go back and you adjust your process a little bit. But for me, I'm just like, just do it, kind of like when if you decide to work out or start an exercise routine. It's the new year. I'm going to do this. For me, I'm just like, go out there and do it. But before you set goals, just walk. You know, and I think that's for the same rules apply for reading. Just read and worry about figuring out the story and worry about what you like or a book's page count or later.
Love that. On the other side of that, what would you tell someone just starting out with writing their own book?
Similar advice to reading. Just my the best advice I ever given somebody is just write. Because if writers come to me and they'll be like, I have this idea for a book, it's gonna be a bestseller, or it's a surefire movie, and I'm like, you just need to put all that out of your brain. That's just noise. You need to write. You need to develop the discipline to write. Um, when somebody comes to me and says, I have this great idea, I think I'm going to write a book. And I tell them, when do you think somebody comes up to a marathon runner and says, I think I can do what you do. I'm gonna run a marathon tomorrow. No, they would never say that. That's absurd. The learning to write, especially in the early days, is very unglamorous. It's lonely. There is no gratification. You have to learn to kind of just develop uh, that writing muscle memory and being being able to write when you have nothing to say is the hardest skill to learn as a new writer. And that's what I would, and also read. You have to read. The best writers read. I've talked to people, oh, I don't want to read them because I have this fear that their ideas will influence my ideas. Absolutely, they will, and they should. You need to read a good writer to become a good writer. This idea that you exist in a vacuum as a writer and your ideas are sacrosanct is absurd. You need imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, as they say, and you need to imitate. You need to learn, and you need to be a sponge when you're a writer. And so read a lot.
Love that. What is one thing that people are generally surprised to find out about you?
Well, when when they see that there's this book called The Sword and the Sophomore starring a 16-year-old girl, I think they're surprised to see a 52-year-old white suburban dad. That which is fine, and I get that. Um it but also I think there's some that when they and this goes back to when I was younger, but I think they're surprised that I'm a guy, period. If they don't know my gender going in, and I think that's not that I'm trying to write that. It's just going back to my own childhood trauma. When you lose a dad at an early age, when you have a terrible godfather, they impress upon you two lifelong lessons, for better or worse, and that is men leave you, men hurt you. I mean, that's kind of hardwired into my brain and into my creative process when I'm writing about stories, writing about situations, and I think kind of along those lines, uh, people are surprised that I've been through that trauma. When you have, oh, there's a father of three, happily married for, oh, my wife's gonna kill me for not remembering this right offhand, but but 20, yeah, 28 that oh, this guy is, had his life handed to him on a silver platter every step of the way. And I'm here to say that's not the case. And but I'm also here to say that, we don't have to be defined by that tragedy. Although I kind of am, but I mean, we don't need to be permanently scarred by that tragedy. We can overcome. We can use that to tell positive stories about how you overcome these things, and how you use them to become uh, a better person, a compassionate person, an empathetic person, a person who almost I say I kind of embrace my tragedy, that a transparent life is the only life worth living, because really, if you allow your tragedy to give you excuses to struggle, then you'll never overcome them. You will be stuck in that cycle of woe is me, uh, until until you're not stuck in it. You know.
Love that so much. Is there anything you would like to say or add?
Well, come July 9th, I would love for people to uh, give The Sword and the Sophomore a chance. Read it in print, but also check out the audiobook. This is a great little asterisk to this whole story, is that right before COVID, through a mutual friend, I got to meet this certain actress, um, and relate to her kind of my career, my personal life, and we became, fast friends. And at that point, my debut novel, By the Ticket, Take the Ride, had been published, and I was just in the early stages of this idea for a YA novel. And this person said to me, "Well, if you were ever finished with this, I've always had kind of this desire to try out audiobook narration. So when you're done, give me a call." And so when it finally got to a place where I thought the manuscript was real, and my agent stopped ripping it to shreds, I I sent it to this person, and she said, "I want to be its narrator if you'll have me." So a couple weeks ago, we wrapped on the recording of The Sword and the Sophomore, as narrated by Tammy Stronach, the childlike empress from The Never-Ending Story. So I think that is a pretty compelling story in and of itself. Is this, uh, really, for me, a, a kind of a cultural icon in fantasy. I mean, it was brought back into the conversation, pop culture conversation. Stranger Things, they referenced The Never-Ending Story, and I got to go to New York while she was recording, and sat in the studio and listened to her watched her record. And there's a little snippet. If you go to B P Sweany on TikTok, there is a video of her recording, and my TikTok people are pretty clever. They cut in little videos of me as a kid, and a scene from Never-Ending Story, things that are I cannot do. And but yeah, that would be something worth adding. Is that this is not only a special book for me. I think it could be a special audiobook for people raised on Tammy Stronach, on the childlike empress, and the never ending story.
Love that so much. Where's the best place for readers to find your books? I know some readers love signed copies. Is that an option and the best place they can connect with you?
Yes. So the book will be available in hardcover, and audio as of July 9th, 2024. Everywhere books are sold, whether that be Amazon or your local indie bookstore, Audible, Libro.fm, audiobooks.com. at your neighborhood library via Overdrive, Hoopla, uh, a myriad of places. You can always get a hold of me. I'm on Threads. I'm on TikTok. Uh, I'm on Facebook. Just some iteration of BP Sweany everywhere. If you type it, you'll find me. BP Sweany. Somebody, it's an unusual spelling of that last name. And then yeah, we're working on putting together a new website, and so there will be an emailing list at some point soon. So look for that. And then otherwise, you can go to my publisher, my print publishers, is Third World Studios, shortened as 3WS, and then my audiobook publisher is Recorded Books. And yeah, you could kind of find me through them as well. I'm pretty available, pretty easy to find, for better or worse, as my wife says.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for being here today. We're so grateful that we got to interview you. We'll be sure to put those links in the show notes. That way everyone can find you. And again, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.